Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tarnished Bronze, where the unfancied and unheralded denizens of the Bronze Age exist. And we are deep in it here with my co host Patrick, who is going to tell us all about the amazing issue of the Avengers 287. Best cover I've seen in a long, long time of any book. But Patrick, tell us where we've left off and what's going on.
I also love this cover. He's totally unhinged. It's exactly the way I like to see my supervillains. So to catch us up, we've got Marina, who's been captured by the Fixer. Um, she's been dumped on the road, and the Fixer is returning to his lair. And meanwhile, the Avengers are wrapping things up in Ohio. They know Marina's missing, and there's sort of a lull in the action where they don't really know what their next step is. They need to find Marina. They don't know where the Fixer is, because they've had a moment out of Scooby Doo, as I mentioned, where they've unmasked who they thought was the Fixer, but it actually isn't even the Fixer. So
And that is incredibly frustrating for Namor, right? On this very first splash page here, who's very upset. He's very animated. It looks like his brother Sal Buscema has gone with some amazing cross hatching.
I was gonna say he looks very inked.
He just has the beautiful, beautiful eyebrows. It's like if Roger Moore was doing an eyebrow lift on both eyebrows all at once, all the time. Just great emotions.
In the world of cosmetics, they I think they call that the Mephisto, which is interesting, right? That's a comic book reference as well, but
Yeah.
that's when maybe women don't quite get the right Botox administered, then they get this sort of eyebrow. But apparently, that's just the way he normally looks. So.
So yeah, I mean, you may have mentioned that there's a lot of desperate housewives going on in the comics of the 1980s, and maybe they could all learn a lesson. Maybe they need to get out their back issues and find out what they're going to do to fill up 26 episodes a season of all these spin-offs. So Tarnished Bronze has something for everybody.
Exactly. That's yeah, we need to appeal to the widest audience possible so that we can get at least 10 listens, right?
Yes, that's I'm aiming for double figures of listens. You
Um,
can like, follow, and subscribe at the link below, but just even listening to this for more than 2.5 minutes is probably enough.
so the Fixer meets up with his old partner with the most dull name ever, Mentalo. This is kind of a you can tell this is a character that's probably a legacy character. Kind of a weak name there. I'm not a fan. Metallo, and Metallo thinks that the Fixer is going to want to join up with him again, but the Fixer immediately betrays him and gives a vague hint of what's to come, because he says he's become something since they last worked together. And this compared to his quote last issue, I think, was his human enemies. We're again thinking, is he a lizard person? What's going on with the Fixer? We're still not sure. They're really doing a good job of keeping and building suspense, and that's something that I don't necessarily see in a lot of comics nowadays. Like I said, I don't read a ton of modern comics, but I have dipped my toe in here and there, and I feel like this is a bit of a lost art, maybe.
I think so. I think the B and C plots are lost in
Mm,
in,
yeah.
in modern comics, and I'm gonna plug the Savage Dragon has the B, C, and D plot. Another modern comic that I like is the latest Nightwing. It's
Oh yeah,
been
you
very
said.
good. It's got a nice sub theme running through rather than a decompressed sort of adventure. It's they live in a rich world, and this comes across here, by the way. And were you capturing this subtext because you read this at the time, Patrick? Like, or more or less, or did you have this issue as a child?
Now, these I have mentioned before that there were a lot of holes in my series. But with these, I do think that by this time, for whatever reason, maybe I was getting comics a little bit more consistently. So I actually think that maybe I read this story for the most part straight through. Um, and to be honest, I it's been so long because it was the mid 80s. And there's
A
been
lot
a
of
lot
stuff
of
happened in the
water
80s, I believe.
a lot of water under the bridge in the 90s. But yeah, I'm honestly not sure what I thought. Knowing me, I may have just read it and taken it for face value and just not really thought about it. I'm somebody that I've always been like this. I'm okay with a surprise. I'm okay with an open present. I'm okay with watching a movie without trying to predict where it's going to go. I say, here I am, entertain me. So, in fact, it kind of gets on my nerves a little bit if you're watching someone who's a little bit too actively trying to figure out the plot. Just let it unfold. So, knowing me, I probably maybe noticed it and was like, I wonder what's going to happen, But not really thinking, trying to figure it out, rack my brain. Comic book guys really love to do that, and I do like comic books, but I've never really considered myself a comic book guy in a way.
Okay. I
Sorry,
mean, if I want a
no
murder
hate.
mystery, I'll read a murder mystery. I mean, I'm not trying to figure out, there's people in here who can fly. There's people in here from 1483 or whenever the Crusades were. I mean, I'm not really trying to pick through it with a fine tooth comb. And if I did, I'd be far more curious about how much is their power bill to run this lair? I mean, if you look at all this, they go
And why
broke.
can't they track him by that? Right?
Yeah.
Like who's using the most General Electric, right? This is
Yeah.
how we need to locate him. Yeah, I think even when you go to the movies, people are oftentimes, I've even kind of heard it, which is really sort of annoying when people want to demonstrate their knowledge but when it comes down to it, the author has complete control of the plot. So if he wants to introduce something in the 11th hour that's completely out of left field, it's possible, and we've seen this in movies. In fact, sometimes that kind of gets on my nerves as well, where something will come out of left field that there's no possible way you could have anticipated. And I kind of sometimes that's you can appreciate that. Sometimes it seems like they're sort of mistreating the audience because
I think that's a very Silver Age trait of comic books, and it works great if you're doing the capers. It doesn't work so well if you're trying to modernize this. Remember, this is 1987. Watchmen is around. Miracle Man is around. The Dark Knight Returns is out. Year One has happened. Things are happening. Ninja Turtles, all this stuff. There's a more sophisticated audience for comic books. And then all of a sudden, some Joker will just appear out of nowhere, or Batman will have, luckily, a bat parachute tucked inside his inseam, which, is probably, if you're drawing that comic book, you might want to draw a bulge there, but then that'll get you in trouble with the Comic Code Authority. So, I
we
mean,
don't do those innuendos on this channel.
yeah, I beg your pardon, but no, I mean, there's this sort of crossover where this is entertainment. It's mindless entertainment. It's just meant to be fun, but then you're also trying to make it serious. And sometimes I think it loses something rather than is bigger than the sum of its parts in doing that. So I do like this fixer caper. I can kind of suspend my disbelief that the sort of superpowered Avenger has been knocked out by the laughing gas. We've got our damsel in distress. There's a lot of things going on. We've inverted some tropes with She-Hulk being the brute of the whole piece. So there's a lot of things in here to be kind of pleased with.
But we also have the sort of social commentary that was very rife in the 80s of the woman coming into power and being second guessed by the men, which has
Undermined.
before exactly. She's Captain Marvel's being undermined by Dr. Druid, and this is also reflecting what we saw in earlier instances when the Wasp was the chairwoman, and she was also sort of being not listened to and undermined by Hercules. So this is a continuing theme in the Avengers that was also being reflected in society that we don't necessarily see as much these days, but at the time it was a real thing. I think maybe sometimes people don't necessarily understand how we actually have made progress as a society.
Yeah, no, I think we're always
What
going
do you
in
think?
a better direction. Well, some of us are going in a better direction. Others are still living in the past, which is great to visit. I don't want to live there. So
Exactly.
speaking of visiting the past, we've just commented briefly on the electrical toll that this computer business must be going on in the Fixer's headquarters. The fellow with the cigar, that's a little bit old timey, but I do like their look. One guy's in green, one guy's in red. It's very, this is all readily identifiable stuff. I mean, these visuals are still pretty top notch, even though we might be juggling a few more balls than we're necessarily capable of Karate Kid Ralph Macchio. But he's still doing it. He's keeping the show going. So
And he's
what's
taking this
happening?
over in media race. He's taking this over from Roger Stern. So Roger Stern started this storyline, and Ralph is now taking over from him and finishing up what is essentially Roger's last storyline, I would have to assume, with
Yeah,
the.
yeah, but this issue does not have the famous editorial in the back. I think that's in one or two more issues, so we won't get too much into that right now. But yeah, we're deep into the Fixer. The Fixer is still kind of the main villain of the piece, right? Because we've sort of dealt with the Adaptoid because we hit him in the nerve gadgets or wherever the nerve ganglions.
The gizzards.
Yeah,
He's been put out of commission. They've carted his putty ass. Can we say that back to the new Avengers mansion on Hydra Base? And now the Fixer has gone on to the next person that we assume he's going to bring into his plot. But like I said, he immediately turns on Metallo and then tortures Metallo so that he sort of sends out this psychic call that Dr. Druid picks up on, and the Avengers immediately race out to, I guess, save this supervillain and stumble into an obvious trap,
and
which
if you do look on page 10, I mean, Fixer is an equal opportunity predator. He was leering over Marina before, and now he's just leering over everyone who comes in his orbit. He's just on page 10. He's just got a really good, he is the arch predator of this series. And Buscema is really going into town, giving him some good character moments there.
I mean, the bald head really does it, and he's taken off his cowl or his helmet or whatever that is, so that you can really get the full effect of how threatening he actually is.
Yeah.
And like I said, in the past, I never really considered the Fixer to be such a main character or someone who could sort of drive the plot as a supervillain, but he's really doing a good job. So the Avengers stumble into this trap, and once again, well, they're separated into groups, and we can see this on the cover. And for once, truth in advertising. As a kid who often picked comics based on the cover, there was nothing more frustrating than finally reading the book and realizing that the cover had nothing to do with the plot therein. But these covers are actually pretty representative of what's happening in the issues, which I appreciated then, appreciate still. But once again, Captain Marvel is too weak to use her powers. She's saved by Namor, and again, it just goes into what you have said, is that this character is really being written as a very weak, difficult to like her if you're coming in at this point. As someone who had been reading the Avengers for a long time, I liked her, and it was a bit frustrating to see her question herself so much. As I said in the previous episode, she's a huge heavy hitter. So in order to make the battles interesting, we often have to take her out of the battle in some way. And in this case, she's too weak to use her powers. But it is getting a bit stale and repetitive. As soon as there's action, she's immediately sort of relegated to the sidelines. So
Yeah. And Namor, the prince of Atlantis, not king, just prince. He's doing his calisthenics overtime. I mean, he's meant to be a water-based organism, right? But he does pretty well on land with all of this flipping and throwing all the missiles, and he's just having a riotous old time.
catching the missiles upside down it's an excellent. I even referred to that in my notes when I saw that. That's a great drawing.
Yeah, that and then he gets embroiled in some sort of other trap. So it was one trap, this missile launch, and then the second trap is the Doctor Octopus arms, which once again Buscema draws things that have a basis in physics. Like if I got tied up in this, I would stay tied, rather like one of those ladies in the Conan stories. She is staying tied up. Namor is in a lot of trouble here. These traps aren't. They're taking all of the Avengers out. That's what the Fixer is doing. He is a
He's
hell of a guy.
he set this trap and they've come into his lair, and which was a mistake, and he's using his preset defenses, sort of like the Avengers Mansion used to have before it got destroyed. So yeah, they're really taking care of him, and giving him a lot of strength in terms
Yeah,
of his lair.
just to do
So
some meta commentary, he has come a long way from selling drugs to Speedy, who is Green Lantern psychic. He's come a long way. He's got a lair. He's got a look. He's a double crosser. He's doing it
maniacal
all.
cover feature.
Yeah, he's getting some juice in 1987.
100%. And I wonder if I did not do this research, but I wonder how often he's even appeared since then.
How
Maybe,
could you top this? You've
I,
taken,
like we mentioned, I think we mentioned that reading the George Perez Avengers, and I read all of those. I don't think he ever made an appearance then, so I don't know. He may have just sort of disappeared, but the Avengers do find Mentallo, and he tells them that the Fixer's mind is totally alien, and this folds into what we already know, that he's become something, that he's not acting like himself. He's betrayed his former partner. So again, the mystery deepens as to what really is going on with the Fixer, and the team discovers. Uh, Once they get Metallo and get him out of there, they go back to their lair, um, and they are sort of putzing around Avengers Mansion when they suddenly discover that a containment chamber that previously held the super adaptoid is actually holding the Fixer.
yeah, this is where it sort of got a bit curious for me because as much as I like the thing that looks like a sentinel in that sort of dry ice looking chamber that you eventually kind of see, I was a little bit confused by that. Albeit this is an Avengers comic, so it's not meant to make necessarily the most sound of of space time continui if one wants to do that, and I don't want to really separate mind from body and all that sort of stuff, but it
He
it
does
just
sort of look
seems,
like a sentinel. That's a good call, actually.
yeah, it just sort of I was just seeing a lot of things because my point of reference isn't whatever this robot is meant to be. I know this storyline's called Heavy Metal, so I presume it's a robot, but it looks like a bit like a sentinel. It's my favorite panel, honestly, and in a book that has loads of great panels, it just looks ominous. It looks Black Knight is selling this as a surprise.
Good
Everyone
Lord,
is
it's the
in this.
Fixer. That's, I
Yeah,
mean, that's all you need to know that it's not a sentinel, Matt, is just the the word blurb where Black Knight is screaming, "Good
yeah.
Lord, the Fixer," right?
But how does he know that? That's what I thought I could
He
ask you.
recognizes him. They fought,
Okay,
right? So,
okay,
so just to give a little background, the team has fought the Fixer very recently. So the Fixer was a member of the Masters of Evil when the Masters of Evil, maybe let's say 10 issues previous.
okay. So by recently you mean 1985.
Yeah, well, recently in Avengers time. So
Okay, thank you.
it's difficult. It's difficult because it's really only two storylines back. Uh,
Okay, so it's
but
conceivable that this guy would recognize him instantly. He's already invaded the Avengers Mansion in two storylines prior, and
and when they captured him, they think that they have put him away, so they don't expect him to be in there. The containment chamber is supposed to be holding the super adaptoid, but instead it's the Fixer, and that's when the Avengers realize that during the siege of their mansion, the adaptoid's containment chamber must have been knocked open, which is conceivable. The mansion was pretty much knocked to its foundations, and that he has escaped and been impersonating the Fixer ever since.
okay, so
So
So it's Fixer Mark II, or a pseudo Fixer, and he may or may not be a robot. Um, and Namor is having none of it. He's, just looking beautiful there, shirtless for reasons that escape me still.
He never gets cold.
Yeah, just no. I think this had a lot of stuff. I'm always worried when there's a comic that wants to follow a truck for pages on end, but not here. It kind of made it more of a suspenseful thing.
It was a great,
Um,
it was a
yeah,
great, it was a, to me, it was a great twist. It was, oh, but it wasn't the fixer, it was Todd Martin, right? The
yeah,
scientist.
yeah, yeah.
Wasn't the, and now it's not it's still not the fixer.
It's a
It's a
it's a
super
double
adaptoid.
switch. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
great stuff.
one thing, I'm not here to poke holes in plots. I 100% like to just go along with whatever the author is, wherever he's trying to lead me. But one thing that didn't completely add up is that the super adaptoid is a completely different character than the fixer with a completely different power set. He's much more threatening. Um, I'm wondering why he has gone so all in being the fixer that he has denied his huge power set. So during the raid on the Avengers mansion, he's only used the fixer's powers when his powers are so much greater in scope. He could be mimicking the other Avengers' powers. He's allowed himself to be put in prison.
Yeah,
And he could have, I'm thinking conceivably have impersonated other, heroes or villains' powers and escaped anytime he wanted to.
it is a bit puzzling.
Yeah, he's used a very specific fixer method to escape from prison, and maybe that's he's gone deep undercover, and obviously we know stepping out of it from what do they say, the fourth wall, that it's a way for the writer to keep the reader in suspense and to not know exactly what's happening. But maybe it doesn't completely make sense, just conceptually when you think the super adaptoid has so much power base that he can call on, whereas the fixer is much more limited in scope.
Yeah, no. That said, I can be along for the ride. This is something that, as it comes out, there were no trade paperbacks, there was no comics online, there was no internet to even order a whole tranche of comics if one needed to fill gaps. So you had to go day to day, or month to month to month, and I'm not going to play continuity cop to reading things that are just meant to be fun. I felt this issue went along pretty swiftly. I think that we are building into something really good. I was very worried when we decided to do this channel and to delve into these things that we were starting a comic made by a guy who was the editor of Spider-Man during the Spider-Man clone saga. And so I was not expecting this to be quite as refreshing and light of a read, to be honest, even though there's multiple characters and identity swaps and so on and so forth. It kind of sells it to me. I was just curious about why this Black Knight guy knew that it was the fixer and not a sentinel. But that explanation seems pretty straightforward. Now, there's one little thing in here that, besides the art, which John Buscema is just doing a great job, it does seem a bit busy. There's 11 pages in this that are the classic 6-panel grids. But I didn't notice it until I went back and counted it. So it reads really well. The captioning is pretty good. Like we said in the last episode, everyone has their own little personality. I
Wait,
love the black and white art for Marvel, Captain Marvel's powers when it sort of goes off and on. There's some black and white art, and that gets used later on too. I think Buscema just gets more comfortable with. I'm pleasantly surprised. You and I know that Walt Simonson is just coming down the pike pretty soon, but I always wonder, like, this is a pretty interesting Avengers story. We're going to get into some more of it later, and what might have been if this had have just been the status quo for 3 or 4 years.
I,
It's a
I
bit,
would, well, and maybe, oh, well, I guess it's a different writer, but
yeah.
um, in terms of the tone and the characters, I do think that they stick around for a while. That's my recollection. It's been a while since I've read this, and I'm only a few issues ahead.
Okay, so we are going to end it here. I'm just going to give you an update
I
that
will say that we do end with another bit of a plot hanging where the Fixer is going to recruit Machine Man. So another character that is being drawn from the depths of history.
oh, okay.
He has found Machine Man, who I'm now. This is something even that as a kid I probably would have noted. I thought Machine Man was a hero, but for some reason, the Fixer, which we now know is the super adaptoid, but he's still posing as the Fixer, is trying to recruit Machine Man, and by dangling the fact that he's going to bring back his lost love. So, and that's how this issue ends. And sorry, you were saying.
Oh, and speaking of lost loves, there's a beautiful, beautiful ad for Forgotten Realms, the Dungeons and Dragons thing. I could not get enough of that sort of stuff as a kid. That artwork just really sells it. It's a kind of, Lord of the Rings knockoff within the Dungeons and Dragons verse. Can't get enough of it now. Couldn't get enough of it then. Was very, very invested. And just to give our audience some context, before we end the episode, Dark Knight Returns is now $30.
Hmm?
30 US dollars, 1987. So I think it's been out only a year. And already this issue costs 75 cents. So that's about 42 issues worth of comics will buy you issue one of Dark Knight Returns, which is just absolutely astonishing.
And it
So
shows
comics are
why the
going,
speculation business began in the ensuing years, right?
yeah. And our channel isn't about financial tech. I'm not interested in getting key issues. We're interested in uncovering some good issues that are overlooked and really taking our collections to the moon from potentially this being worth dozens of cents to maybe even $1. You never know. So Patrick, it's been great to have you for this episode. I feel that this cover is going to take a lot of beating in the Tarnished Bronze future. It's going to be very tough to find a better cover from the late 80s than this. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. And we will catch you and the listeners in the next episode where we read The Avengers issue 288. I personally can't wait.
See you later.